Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, and my co-host Justin Baker and I will yet again rank another National Hockey League's top 10 players of all times. And this week we start and finish with the New Jersey Devils. And this was a fun one, actually. I actually made this list and got to about 8 or 9 before I even had to consult any kind of statistics, and then I went back and made a few adjustments. But I felt like I knew this team pretty well.
Yeah, I had a definitely a tougher time when you talk about maybe 8 through 10 and some of my just missed people, because you could literally shuffle any of those 5 or 6 people I have and feel comfortable putting them in there. And so I'll be honest, I really had to dig a little deeper. And growing up, I always had a little bit of a hatred for the New Jersey Devils, so it made it even harder to put some of these names on this list, given what they did to my Red Wings back in '95.
Well, I think everybody hates this team, unless you're a Devils fan. They did the same thing to the Leafs in the early 2000s. They beat them 2 times in the playoffs, and they were, and they were just, it was horrible. One game against the Leafs. In the playoffs, the Leafs had 6 shots on goal.
Disgusting.
It's the lowest amount of shots on goal ever in an NHL game, and it was in, I believe, a game 7.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, it was horrendous, and it was in the second round of the playoffs. It's not like you're a 1 and an 8, and you have to be blowing the team away. That was probably the worst game I've ever seen in my life, at least. As a Leafs fan, the most impressive defensive display of all time. And you wonder why Martin Brodeur had so many shutouts. Well, one of them, he only made 6 saves, and he got a shutout. Crazy. Okay. With that said, let's go to our just missed. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't heard our other rankings of other teams, we're almost done. We only have 4 teams after this, so there's a good chance that your favorite team's somewhere in our list. You just subscribe and go back and find those episodes. They're all available for you. And with that said, let's hit our just missed. Justin, who narrowly missed your top 10?
3 big names for you. First, maybe easier of the 3 to leave off, because he didn't spend a ton of time with the Devils, but Zach Parise.
Yeah, I also have him on a just missed. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Then I've got Mr. Holik and Mr. Zajac on my just missed.
Okay, yeah. I honestly didn't even. I started typing Travis Zajac, and I said, no, he's done nothing. He doesn't deserve to be on this list. He just happened to play for them for a long time. That's really it.
There you go.
I have on my just missed, as well as Parise, I have Bruce Driver, who is the 3rd all-time scorer for the New Jersey Devils, and I also have Jason Arnott, and then Taylor Hall. I have a few names. Taylor Hall I put on there because I think he probably has the best individual season, not points-wise. That points-wise goes to, I believe it's someone in the 90s. Now I can't remember. I got to pull up those stats. But he has the most points per game in a season, so I think that it's worth noting he did have one of the best seasons in the history of the New Jersey Devils, so I'm willing to stick him on the just missed.
I can't really blame you. I thought about it and really wanted to put him on my list. You look at the guy, he had the only Hart Trophy this franchise has ever seen.
Yep.
So it was very difficult, but unfortunately he only spent 3 seasons there, so made it a little bit hard for me.
All right, well, with that said, let's go to our top 10. Who's your number 10?
Yeah, number 10 is a guy I hated when he played for both of these franchises, one being the New Jersey Devils, and that is Claude Lemieux.
All right, Claude Lemieux.
Yeah, I think, when you look at, his abilities both as an agitator and a goal scorer, he was definitely a very important cog in this New Jersey's Devil wheel early on in the 90s, and obviously a big key in why they won the cup there in 90 in 95, and scoring 13 goals in 20 games. And personally, I would have maybe given the award to Martin Brodeur at the time, but Claude Lemieux obviously gets the Conn Smythe there for that that Stanley Cup, and then oddly enough goes on and wins it again next year in Colorado. So,
well, yes, the Stanley Cup, yes.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Yes, Claude Lemieux also, he's my number 10 as well, so that works out well. I mean, the funny thing is the year that he won the Conn Smythe Trophy, he only had 16 points in the playoffs. I mean, it's not like there were 3 or 4 guys ahead of him on the scoring sheet just for the Devils, let alone the Red Wings. Of course, you weren't giving a Red Wing the Conn Smythe Trophy for getting swept in the finals, but I mean, there were guys with more points than Lemieux. 13 goals, that's impressive. That led the team, but I mean, 16 points in 20 games when the year before and the year after, the guy who wins the Conn Smythe had over 30 points. This is crazy. Like an all-out defensive game. Of course, it was the Devils. But yeah, he also had a better playoff the year before. They didn't win the cup. They didn't even go to the Stanley Cup Finals. They were in the conference finals, but he actually had 18 points in 20 games in 93-94. So also another really nice playoff for the Devil. He always showed up in the playoffs. He never he always scored a couple goals at least, but usually had, his lowest, other than a 2-goal season, his lowest was a couple 4 goals in the playoffs. So he definitely knew how to show up in the playoffs. So. Okay, well, that equals the same number 10, so let's go to number 9.
Yeah, number 9 for me is a hometown boy here in Michigan. That's Brian Rafalski.
Okay, you got Brian. Yeah, I have Brian Rafalski a little bit higher.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Probably, I mean, honestly, it's weird. You look at his career numbers, right, and you think for as well as he played throughout the seasons he was there with New Jersey and Detroit, right? He didn't actually get started till he was 26. I mean, that's crazy to me. And you think about it when he came in 99, 2000, and obviously, kind of exploded. And to me, he's been one of the more underrated offensive defensemen, and, well, I guess maybe you could say two-way defenseman that this franchise has ever really had.
Yeah. I mean, he was so underrated too. I mean, he just, you happen to be playing in the same team as Scott Niedermayer and Scott Stevens, guys that will appear higher on this list. I mean, really, it's tough to find a team with 3 defensemen that are that good. Even in the history of the National Hockey League, there's very few teams that could match that top 3, especially in terms of Stanley Cup winners. And he won 2 cups with them. So,
yeah, and I remember specifically when he came to Detroit. I can't remember what season. I think it was 2008, but the Detroit Red Wings, I mean, same thing as New Jersey, right? They had Rafalski, Kronwall, and Lindstrom, 3 guys with over 50 points each. And, you talk about teams with 3 prominent, really good defensemen, and it's kind of a rare deal. And they were fortunate enough to be a big defensive team, but have 3 guys that could really do it on both ends of the ice.
Yeah. Also, the year... So his rookie season, of course, they win the Stanley Cup. He's got 8 points in the 23 playoff games. The following year, where they lose to Colorado in that Game 7, he's got 18 points in 25 games, which is an impressive number when you consider he's a defenseman. On top of that, when you consider the fact that those Devils teams didn't score ever, and no one scored against them. So, yeah, it was... He was incredibly underrated. He definitely, if we're making a list of underrated players, it's like Brian Rafalski is definitely on that list.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, so yeah, I've got him a little bit higher. My number 9 is a guy who, in terms of all-time scoring for the New Jersey Devils, he sits 4th, 520 points in 556 games for the Devils, and it is Kirk Muller. He had some fantastic seasons for this team, not only putting up big numbers. I mean, no one has ever scored 100 points for this team, which is marginally surprising. I know they were really bad in the 80s, but it seemed like everyone was getting 100 points, so you'd think somebody would. He had a 94 and an 86 point season, several 30 goal seasons for this team, but also put up over 100 penalty minutes a couple of times. He definitely was your like all around really good defensive center, and he just, I think before the Devils were the Devils, he was playing that way, but also putting up big points. Unfortunately, they didn't really make the playoffs very much, but in 87-88, they did go to the conference finals, and he put up some big numbers for them. But I think Kirk Muller, there's got to be some throwback to that team from the 80s before they won all their Stanley Cups, and he's a guy on my list. He's really, I think, the only one on my list that didn't win a Stanley Cup for the Devils, so had to toss him in there.
Yeah, can't blame you. I think he as well is the only one on my list that didn't win a cup with the franchise.
And 935 points per game is the third best all time, and it's also like the other guys around him played 200, 100 games, so he definitely was very, very consistent through his career there as well.
Yep.
Let's go number 8.
Number 8 for me, a prominent center for this franchise for quite a few years until, like many of the, probably a couple other guys on this list got paid a little bit more money to go, across the pond to.
He went to the Rangers, didn't he?
The Rangers, yeah. That's Scott Gomez.
That's Scott Gomez. He also is my number 8. So.
Okay, wonderful, yeah. This guy, he wasn't much of a goal scorer outside of one random 30-goal season, which was just surprising to me. Never scored more than 20 any other season, but he was just a steady center for this franchise. Played the game. He was speedy. He had good hands, and
but he had a ton of assists. I mean, he had other than a little blip where he only had 38 assists in 76 games, he always had more than 40 or 50 assists. I mean, for just a long, long time. I mean, he was he definitely knew what he was doing in terms of dishing the puck. He just didn't really shoot very much. I mean, his shooting percentage wasn't that bad all the time, but he didn't really shoot all that often. So he also had a proclivity for the ECHL. He played in the ECHL twice during both lockouts. I don't know why I decided to point that out, but I did. The guy goes to the Alaska Aces in the ECHL, and in 61 games, he only put up 86 points. The guy goes to the ECHL and scores 13 goals in the ECHL in 61 games. Then the following year in the NHL, in 82 games, he scores 33 goals.
Well, I mean, first off, he is from Alaska, right?
Oh, so, yeah. But why couldn't he score in a league that is so much lower? That's weird. But, yeah, I mean, he wins those 2 Stanley Cups for the Devils and really was like, he kind of was their third-line center, but he was just so important. He killed penalties. He played the Devils' way. And I remember in 98 watching the draft, and the Devils of course, they're drafting low in the draft because they were always competitive. They drafted 27th overall, and I remember when they drafted him that people were going, "Who is this guy?" Like they actually didn't have him on any list for the first round. Like nobody had him in the first round, and I remember guys going, "Whoa, this is a really funky pick," and of course it all ended up being a very good pick. And that actually he was the last pick of the first round. There was only 27 picks in the first round that year. But, I mean, it was obviously a good pick. There were very few guys after that. If you go look at the 98 draft, any guys within 10, 15 picks of him, the next best one's Mike Fisher at 44. So they definitely made a good pick. Also, I mean, the guys before it, other than Simon Gagne, really not many guys worked out there either. So the Devils get the last laugh. Okay, let's do our number 7.
Yeah, 7 for me is a guy you've already talked about a little bit. That's Kurt Muller, former captain of the New Jersey Devils in the bad 80 years of this franchise when they really didn't have a lot of success, and fortunate enough to win a Stanley Cup at least once in his career.
Right, with Montreal, right?
Yeah, with Montreal. Like you said, the only guy on the list that really didn't win a cup with the Devils, but this guy sits fourth all-time in franchise scoring, so it's kind of hard to leave him off the list. How important he was to the Devils early on in their franchise tenure after they left Colorado.
Yes, and he was there. He was like a second overall pick for them in '94, so that's obviously a big pick. I mean, they have two really good drafts. I mean, in '84 they picked Kirk Muller, and then in '83, the year before, they pick a guy that I have a little bit later on my list. So they did a good job drafting. It just, the rest of the team sucked. At least they did a good first round drafting. Okay, my number 7 is the guy who has played the most games in Devils history, and that is a defenseman, a guy who puts up hardly any points. He's basically the Brooks Orpik of the New Jersey Devils.
Well said.
In 1,283 games, he scored but 36 times. Just to put that into perspective, in about the same amount of games, Martin Brodeur scored 2 times. So, I mean, he really didn't score that much more than Martin Brodeur.
Yeah, he actually had a run of 3 straight seasons towards the end of his career, not scoring a single goal.
Yeah, see, he was the Brooks Orpik.
Yeah, how deflating is that? Like, after 1 year, you don't score a goal, okay. Like, some defensemen, I get it, but then you go and do it a second and third year. Like, you got to just feel terrible.
He scored an average of, his goals per game is .028. Brodeur's is .002. So, hey. And in terms of assists, he got 142 assists. I know this sounds like we're just smashing Ken Daneyko, but it's just funny because he wasn't a point guy at all. He had 142 assists in less games. Brodeur had 45 assists. Just funny. Okay, so he also is the franchise leader in penalty minutes. He has 2,519 penalty minutes. So Ken Daneyko, just kind of your like incredibly steady top 4 defenseman for the bulk of his career. He's on the Devils forever. I mean, he came to the Devils when they were just terrible. I mean, he had 4 straight seasons of over 219 penalty minutes. And then he drops to 170, goes back up to 236. I mean, the guy, he was a bruiser. He kind of embodied, it was like the Devils were primed and ready for Scott Stevens because of Ken Daneyko. I mean, he just played the Devils' way long before the Devils were this defensive staunch of a team, and I think he was there forever. You can't not have him on this list. When you think of his face, he's a Devil. So I think he belongs on this list as much as anybody else, and definitely not like he's not going to the Hall of Fame, nothing like that, but he was just a steady, solid defenseman for pretty much his entire career, even down to his final year in 2002, 2003. Still a good, solid defenseman. Actually put up the most points that he had put up in a while, but just always solid back there.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. That's why he is my number 6 on this list.
Okay, number 6. Brian Rafalski is my number 6.
Okay.
So I know we've run through Brian Rafalski quite a bit. The reason I have him ahead of a Ken Daneyko, whereas you have Rafalski a little bit lower. I based Rafalski. I think was actually ironically they were defensive partners for a while, but I just think that Rafalski in terms of talent was so good. I mean, obviously overshadowed by the other 2 great defensemen that have played for this team. But I think that he is the 3rd best defenseman to play for this team, and he is like well above any other guy who is below him for this franchise. I think that Brian Rafalski, I mean, he proved it by going to Detroit and really being the other guy with Nicholas Lidstrom. He really never got to go anywhere to be the guy. But, I mean, some guys just play really, really, really well as that second guy, and he just you could always rely on him. He was similar that he wasn't going to make huge mistakes, and he could move the puck. And even though he didn't put up huge numbers all the time, he always could move the puck and create offense. Maybe didn't get the points, but definitely created offense.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
Okay, so you had Daneyko at 6. Talk to me about why you had him that high.
Yeah, I guess when you just look at like what this guy was to a franchise like the Devils, right? They don't have a ton of guys who, I mean, like outside of Marty Brodeur and Patrick Elias, there's no one else on this list that's played over 1,000 games for this franchise. And just the fact that even though he wasn't a point producer, the fact that he had a tenure so long just showed how good he was, how rock solid he was back there, and what he really meant to this franchise and what he brought to the ice every single night.
All right. Well, Ranker has him ranked 5th. If that gives you an idea. I mean, generally, I don't. If you've ever been to Ranker.com, it's people who are fans of the team are going in and they're ranking these players. So I think it's safe to say Ken Daneyko deep in the hearts of New Jersey Devils fans. On to number 5. Who do you got? Number 5.
Number 5 for me is a guy who is second all time in scoring for this team. Scored the infamous overtime goal against the Chicago Blackhawks to send this franchise to their first ever playoff in 1988, and that is John McClain.
All right, I also have John McClain at number 5. He's also the third most penalty minutes in team history.
Yeah, he did have quite a long tenure, almost 1,000 games, just a little above 900, but still managed to put over 347 goals on the score sheet. I think he's second only behind Patrick Elias in terms of goal scoring for a franchise that honestly didn't score a lot of goals, and that's why you don't have any. You only have 2 guys, honestly, that have scored more than 250 goals for this franchise, and which is just crazy.
Yeah, I know. When you look at you sort everything by goals, and you go from the top, and it just falls out really fast.
Right.
But yeah, John McClain. I mean, he had some of the best seasons for this team. He had a 45-goal season in 90-91, and was just a very consistent point producer. I mean, of course, over the course of his entire career, he ends up playing almost 1,200 games. So definitely a guy who lasted a long, long time. Another first-round pick for the New Jersey Devils. He's who I was talking about. Was taken the year before Kirk Muller. So not bad. John McClain and then Kirk Muller the following year. I think anybody will take 2 drafts in a row having guys that are potential top 10 players to ever play for your team. That's a pretty good bet. Okay, into the top 4. I think we're going to have relatively similar top 4s, my guess. This team just everything lays out very nicely for the Devils, but let's see if we have anything different. Who's your number 4?
Patrick Elias.
Yeah. I've got Patrick Elias at number 4 as well. Probably, maybe the unsung hero of the Devils, because obviously they needed a forward who would score goals.
Yeah,
they needed somebody who could score, and he was the guy. He scored 408 times for them in the regular season, and over 1,000 points. But kind of takes a back seat to the 3 guys ahead of him, but was incredibly talented in his own right.
Yeah. Again, I mean, we talk about the lack of goal scoring this franchise has in terms of guys that just never really seem to do it, and he was just steady every year. He could give you 25 to 40 goals without blinking an eye, and just he went about his business quiet, right? He wasn't a bruiser or a guy that went around and really threw up a lot of penalty minutes, but he just quietly went about his business and did it well. Yeah, and
he has by far the most playoff points as well, most goals in the playoffs, most assists in the playoffs. I mean, he has been with this team through pretty much everything. I mean, he won 2 Stanley Cups. He wasn't there for the first one in '95, but Patrick Elias just was always dangerous and was a freaking Leafs killer. And so for that, I don't think I can ever forgive him.
Okay.
But he was the one guy on the team that you weren't scared of in terms of him ending your life.
That's true.
So, all right, into the top 3. Let's do it.
Yeah, this will be interesting. I'm curious to where you have a couple guys here. So I'm going to actually let you go first here with number 3.
Okay, so my number 3, I went with Scott Stevens.
Stevens, okay.
Yes. I mean, it's such a toss-up between these 3 guys, but ultimately I go with Scott Stevens. I think that, it's hard because he really is he was the face. I mean, Scott Stevens was the guy that you dumped your shorts every time he was on the ice, and he like you knew he literally ended people's careers. He ended Paul Kariya. I mean, Eric Lindros. Like there were some. I mean, Slava Kozlov on the Red Wing. Like there were some unbelievable hits that guys were never the same after he hit them. Granted, if he played now, he would go the way of Rafi Torres. He would never be able to play the way that he plays now because it just wouldn't happen. I mean, he hit people in the head all day long. That's all he did. He targeted the head all day long, which it was allowed then. So it's, I mean, we can't necessarily hold that against him. Although he probably should have been thinking, I'm killing people, but hey, that's it's none of my business. But it's him at number 3. I think is appropriate. I mean, he was the captain for those Stanley Cup wins. He was amazing. And he was a guy who put up huge points early in his career and then became this like total shutdown, stay at home guy later. And I think that goes to show how talented he really was, that he could adjust the way that he played and his style and his impact on the ice. But ultimately, in terms of pure talent, I had to put him at number 3 because I think the 2 guys ahead of him on the list are some generational talents.
Okay. Yeah. I have at number 3, Scott Niedermayer. I don't disagree with you. I think he is a generational talent when you talk about defensemen, right? The only difference for me is when I think of what the Devils are, what their type of hockey is, Scott Stevens fit that mold a lot more for me than a guy like Scott Niedermayer. But I will say that I do think in terms of pure talent, Scott Niedermayer is a far more talented defenseman than Scott Stevens was, but just Stevens played that Devils way. He just was a bruiser. He was everything that this franchise was. And, Scott Niedermayer, of course, we know went on to play with the Ducks, had some success there. And, wasn't too shabby in his time with the Devils for sure. Obviously Niedermayer finishes with a few more points than Stevens, but ultimately I put Niedermayer at number 3.
Okay. I mean, Niedermayer was just the guy putting up all the points. you needed somebody to put up points, and he certainly was that. And Niedermayer is a guy who was with the Devils for every Stanley Cup that they won. So that's the one thing that I realized that this list doesn't really have, and the Devils went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2013, and I actually don't really have anybody from the Devils during that time. That would be the Zach Parise. I mean, he's the one who missed it. I guess Brodeur was there, and that would be it. But it's funny that team goes to the Stanley Cup Finals, but they really had a lot of forgetful players, I guess.
Yeah, you could talk about Kovalchuk and Parise, but outside of that, I mean,
yeah. I thought, but right? They just didn't play there long enough. Like that team just kind of fell apart quickly, which is probably why the Devils are where they are right now in real life. Okay, so you've got Niedermayer at 3. Obviously, you've got Stevens at 2.
I do, yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, just make it. I mean, this is your one chance to stick a goaltender at the top.
Well, I've already done that with Dominic Hasek, but
True. That's 2 in a row. It's
two in a row.
Starting to get a little biased, if you ask me. We just so happen to rank teams with like the 2 best goalies of the 90s outside of Patrick Waugh. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious our number 1 is Martin Brodeur. And, I mean, he has 470 more wins than the next guy.
It's crazy.
Oh, wait, no, no, it is. It's 500.
It's 570.
570. Yeah. So he has more, like, in terms of how many wins the next guy has, he has so many wins that no one else has a win in. Nobody else has that many wins in the history of. But Patrick Waugh has 600. But I think he's the only one, right?
Yep.
Oh.
Just insane. And he's faced almost nearly 22,000 more shots than any other goaltender.
Yeah. Definitely, like, by far has the most. I mean, 3 of his wins did come from the St. Louis Blues, but 691 wins, which is 140 more than Waugh. And then the next is Luongo at 489, Belfour 484, and then Fleury 466. He's still adding to that. And so is Lundqvist at 459. But just, I mean, nobody's going to touch it. The 2 goalies that are still active and have had phenomenal Hall of Fame careers are still 250 wins lower than him, pretty much. And I mean, now nobody will touch that record because of the way that goaltenders are used, and you'd much rather play a guy 55 games. Whereas in 06-07, Brodeur played 78 games.
He had a stretch of games. Man. I mean, literally 12 seasons outside of 08-09 where he played 70 plus games.
And we're like. And only 2 of those years he actually played 70.
Right.
I mean, he played in his career. He played 78 games once, 77 games 3 times, 75 games. Like, it's just insane how many games he played. And then, of course, later, like, he starts to play fewer and fewer games. But what an unbelievable career. I mean, the guy just. It was like every year he was just winning more games than he was breaking his own record for wins in a year. I mean, 06-07 he ends up with 48 wins. Just
insane.
Just phenomenal.
Yeah, and you look at it, right? You talk about the way teams use goalies now, right? With you'll see 50, 60 games at most for a starting goaltender now. And I mean, the way the league is set up now too with the salary cap, it's going to be very hard for teams to be competitive for 10 to 15-year stretches like the Devils were there from the 90s to early 2000s.
Yeah, in 02-03, he actually played 97 games that year because of the playoffs as well.
Just crazy.
01-02, yeah, 01-02, they lose in the first round. In 2000-2001, he played 97 games. I mean, and the year before that, 99, he played 95 games. So it's not like he just played the regular season and then that was it. Like, he goes and wins the cup. So he plays a ton more games and was equally as good. I mean, he played in a 2000-2001, he played 72 games. A 2.32 goals against and a 9.06 save percentage. That's just because they didn't get very many shots against them. Like, his save percentage is definitely a little bit lower sometimes than you would expect. But I think the reason why is because he didn't have as many shots on him in, like, per game.
Right. When you're seeing 16 shots a game, but you let in 2 goals, I mean, yeah, your save percentage is going to suffer, but the Devils could pull out those 3-2 wins, no problem.
Yeah. And but yeah, I mean, then really, the year they won the Stanley Cup, he had a 2.07 goals against and an 8.97 save percentage, under 90%. And then the next year, he's got 1.42 goals against and a 9.38 save percentage, and they lose in the first round.
Yeah, just weird.
Word. All right. Well, that's our New Jersey Devils list. Let us know what you thought. Hit us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. And I think we have 4 teams left to go: the Arizona Coyotes, the Calgary Flames. Or no, I'm sorry, 3. I was counting the New Jersey Devils, and then the Columbus Blue Jackets. So, Justin, who do you want to do next?
Let's go with the Blue Jackets.
All right, Columbus Blue Jackets, one of the younger teams in the National Hockey League. We will do them next. We'll talk to you guys when we do that. Enjoy the rest of your day.